Well, we have 15 minutes for questions, comments. Yes.
I have a question for Margaret in terms of Hume's sources and the kind of data he uses. So in the 18th century, we're sort of witnessing the rise of the military fiscal state in Britain. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, so we're witnessing the rise of the fiscal military state in Britain in the 18th century. The sort of the Bank of England is founded in 1694, which really allows it to accumulate debt and fight all those wars. A new bureaucracy arises with the new sort of levying taxes. Record keepers proliferate, and all these, I think, a huge amount of data and documents are created that allow Hume to do the kind of analysis that he does. So I'm wondering whether he's drawing on those kind of sources, whether that is a sort of factor that allows his discourses on economics and how the differences between handling that kind of data versus handling ancient numbers. You were talking about Roman armies and so forth. Thank you.
Question. So, of course, for his ancient sources, he mostly looks at literary sources and is, citing those various figures, Cicero or Herodotus, or what have you. But for the modern period, he is good friends with James Oswald in the 40s, who also was raising Adam Smith from the time of his birth, because James Oswald's especially the family was very close. So James Oswald becomes head of the Board of Trade in Scotland in the 40s. And Hume lives in London while he's bringing out the treatise of human nature he moves there in 1737 from France, where he wrote it. And he's hanging out with all of the Scotsmen, like the Duke of Argyll, who will become the leading shakers and movers of the Scottish economy. They all go to the same coffee shop. So there's reason to think that in those formative years, he actually had access to quite a lot of privileged information. At the end of his life, in the 1760s, he actually becomes first ambassador, secretary to the ambassador in Paris, and then actually for 6 months is the ambassador. This is David Hume. And then moves to England, back to England and London, and is head of the Northern Department as this basically Secretary of State. So he ends his life with this exalted government position, as did Adam Smith as Commissioner of Customs. So they both kind of, revel in their now established position of glory, both of them coming from very poor means, really, they're gentlemen, but they had nothing to start with. Hume lived on £50 a year for his 20s. So I think it's fair to say he did have quite a lot of under-the-table information, and then he would be able to read. We have good reason to think that in France, at the libraries of both Rheims and La Flèche especially, he was able to read a great deal, and we know what he read. I mean, the Hume industry is like the Darwin industry or the Einstein industry. It's vast, and we do increasingly find out what it was that he was able.
Right.
Diana, I'm here. Oh.
There is no Einstein industry.
Okay, there is no Einstein. Right. Okay, sorry. The fact is that we want to know what Hume knew and read, and so there's increasing effort to secure that. So the sources are different, but looking at them in the archives, the atlases, if you will, are full of data about trade patterns and prices. And everybody's very interested in this because wholesale markets have really burgeoned in the 18th century to particularly feed the London market. London's over 1 million people. So we see a really dramatic change as well in how there are economies of scale. Again, Hume discerns those and sees the fall of prices in things like beef and beer and corn and so forth. So I think that the access. He couldn't go to the British Library as I can, but I think he actually could read a lot of these works. Thanks.
Questions?
This is to John. So you've been at where is he? Oh, there you are. So you've been at Georgia Tech for quite a while, and you just mentioned the recent problems and so on. So what's your feeling about the change in the ways in which administrators have been operating? Because Georgia Tech, I think, Georgia Tech is funded publicly, is it not?
Yes, Georgia Board of Regents.
Yeah.
Yes. Georgia Tech is run like a business. The basic business model that is now operating at Georgia Tech is one driven by people like PricewaterhouseCoopers and McKinsey. The people who are recruited after consultations with business companies and accountants firms like these. Georgia Tech has abolished its library entirely. All its books have been placed in a depository. We now just simply have computer terminals. It's called the Library of the 21st Century, on the grounds that it's an economic solution to the fact that engineers don't read many books anyway. It also has some astonishing features which betray the deep impregnation of management culture into everyday life. For example, I have been honored with the Bacon Award to come here to Caltech for next semester. Salary exchange was done between the two schools. Salary replacement was managed, and I got a note from my dean's office saying that there's a difference of $63.70 between what Caltech is giving to Georgia Tech and what my salary is. And I almost said, who shall I write the check to? The worst example is perhaps that there's a dress code at Georgia Tech in the faculty handbook, which I don't think anybody reads. It's talking about how to dress in the summer. And the way in which you're supposed to dress in the summer on Fridays for the gentlemen is business casual. In other words, and what is important, and Daniel Kleinman has written a very good article about this, is management culture seeps through the pores of the system in very gradually but very definitively in more and more ways. And academic achievement is less and less important, I think, as a marker, as a criterion for advancement. It's much more about how many grants you can get, how much money you can bring in, and of course, management criteria of achievement, not intellectual ones. It's really distressing, I think.
What would you call management criteria for achievement?
Management criteria, I think, as I said, in terms of getting grants. Bringing in grants is important. Well, of course, the engineers are brilliant at that. And let's be clear, right? This is a state university, nominally, in which the State Board of Regents plays a very important role. Whenever anything goes wrong at Georgia Tech, we are heavily criticized and actually financially punished for it. So, for example, the president closed down a fraternity rather too quickly when some young men in it were accused of using the N-word. All he did was make a procedural mistake. The Board of Regents fined him $35 million for that because the young boys of Georgia had been unfairly dismissed. But I think also, I wanted to say something else, but I'm sorry, I forget what it is now. But it is in the way in which we're assessed and judged. Oh, I wanted to say that the state pays 17% of Georgia Tech's budget. 17%. Most of the money is from grants. And but we have a GTRI research, a classified section of work is also done on the campus. These people haul in millions of dollars a year. It's something like, I think I just saw the data now, something like 680 million a year at least, plus fees and tuition. And so we depend heavily on, as a public university, on foreign nationals, especially from Asia, plus grants, plus federal support. And that drives the way the institution understands academic achievement, which has serious effects for us in the humanities. It's not easy for us to get grants on that scale.
One more question on administration. What is your ratio of tenure line to non-tenure line faculty? And is the administration intervening in tenure line positions and making them non-tenure line, full-time or otherwise?
I can't answer that question because I'm not close enough to the centers of power.
Same here.
It's happening all over the country. I mean, the number of assistant and associate deans, sub-deans, administrators, it's just astronomical. Meantime, the last year, there's no money for salary raises.
Right.
In fact, it had to be taken from some side budget for a few people. So the administration is very rapidly accumulating a large number of very senior posts at the expense of the teaching mission. I think that's another nice way of making the point. I've just been told that the current provost, who will soon not be there because the president has to step down after all these scandals, is hiring 3 top officials at $500,000 each probably, and they won't even be there probably. He'll be going soon. So he's spending a huge amount of money on, of course, salary lines where we don't get very money.
Yeah, and some of these searches I know are run without searches. They'll choose somebody to hire for those positions. The administration.
I'm not close enough to
Well, it's true at Georgetown.
I just noticed what's going on through the regular. So this explosion of administration is a serious problem. Serious problem.
Not all at once.
I'm just asking you to use microphone, we can't hear him.
I thought my voice was projecting, sorry. Did everybody get my last point? The basic point is the administration is exploding, and exploding on such a large scale that there's no money left for faculty lines. And it's 3, 4, 5 times bigger than it was when I arrived 20 years ago. Is this for me?
I mean, I love this. I love this material. I like the whole session. Thank you very much to everybody. Thanks much to everybody. But I wondered if you had, from all this, looking at what Hume was doing, he's mostly, he's data savvy or something. He's scrappy and he's picking up what he can find from all the different sources. And I have the impression there's rather little of the sort, kind of official statistics that are going to explode, in the next century. And I just wondered if you have a sense of, what Hume can do and can't do with the kinds of resources he has, and does he seem, do you think he would have, if he'd had official numbers, would he have relied on them, or was he always trying to look behind the scenes?
Well, again, it's a good question. I mean, I think if you're charitable to Hume, you can give him 7, 8 laws that he lays out: the quantity theory of money, the correlation of the interest-profit rate, the secular fall of the profit interest rate, the fact that real prices are falling, the fact that there's considerable economic growth that he establishes, the fact that the population is growing. So he's got about, 7 or 8 pretty robust universal laws that he's trying to establish. We hesitate to say that because we don't think there are laws in the economy. He certainly knows and cites the law of supply and demand and all the kind of basic ways in which markets clear that had already been established, and of corn and so forth. But probably his greatest contribution is the one that Milton Friedman singled out, that if you can surreptitiously inject money into a region for a short period of time, you can essentially deceive people into thinking they're wealthier and they'll all work harder in the same day. And that actually has the wonderful effect of creating more goods and services that don't necessarily go away. So growth, yeah, he's celebrating economic growth, and he's helping himself to as much data as he can find. But he's looking to China, he looks to Persia, he looks to Peru, he looks to Mexico, Jamaica, New England. He's always trying to find out everything about the world as well, not just his own Britain or France that he lived in. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful session.